Hello, today I want to show you a simplified version of my t-shirt remix. I'm going to call this a t-shirt refresh because we're just going to stitch and not add the cutting and the two layers. And I think t-shirts are a great project to use to be mindful. First of all, because t-shirts are kind of one of those disposable items of clothing that we buy frequently and throw away just as frequently. And so I think it's amazing if we can step back and say, okay, can I do something to make this t-shirt more wearable for myself? As Marie Kondo would say, to spark joy, so that I don't end up throwing it away or giving it away, but I can get more use from it. And the other thing is that I find hand stitching is also very mindful, especially when you're doing a repetitive thing like the back stitch and you're just stitching and stitching to create a design. It can be very soothing to have that repetitive action. So today I'm going to show you how to refresh your t-shirts by adding some designs and some embroidery. I'm taking a movement break from my sewing and I want to share a few tips with you. So one is that I want you to think about what happens to your posture when you're sewing or on your phone or on your computer. And we tend to do this kind of thing. So first of all, I want you to practice sitting up, lifting your shoulders, drawing them back and releasing them so you have nice posture. But the other thing I want you to think about is that actually what is not necessarily the best posture for our body. And so a lot of times we're concerned about this double chin action when actually that is exactly what we want. So we're going to do what I call head ramping. So lift through the crown of your head, relax your shoulders, down and pull your ears back. This kind of double chin, but I want you to think about movement, not really what you look like. So it looks kind of weird, but this is actually really good for your body. I want you to think about when you're walking, driving, whatever, think about what's happening here and see if you can pull your head into a little different position. The next one related to that is that we're getting some tension here, probably from what we've been doing. So I want you to just do some gentle yes and no's. We're not trying to get a super deep stretch or anything like that. Double check that your shoulders are relaxed and down, not creeping up. And don't go further than is comfortable, especially when you're going left to right. So just gently getting some different movement in. And then the last tip is our hands have been working really hard. So let's just do some wiggles or some piano fingers, whatever you want to call them, and just get some of that tension out. Let them move in a different way because they've probably been kind of pinched up. So get a little wiggle in your fingers and just think about adding little bits of movement throughout your day, especially when you're working on things that can be very repetitive. So some supplies that you'll need, I have a t-shirt, I have a pattern that I've printed out, and then I'm going to use embroidery floss because I have that. If you didn't have embroidery floss, you could use regular sewing thread, just use several strands or maybe a really thin yarn to get the same effect. And then I've got scissors and I'm using a Crayola washable marker because it will wash out of my t-shirt, and you can get a package of these for the same price as buying a special fabric pen. And then I have some glue. So because I printed this on my computer, it's kind of lightweight and I want it a little stiffer so I can trace around it. So I have a piece of cardstock, but if you didn't have, and you could print straight on this, but if you didn't have cardstock, I've also used mailer pieces or just really, heavy paper that you get that you're just going to throw away. And so I'm going to begin by putting some glue, and I don't really have to glue the whole page, I just need to glue the design that I'm going to cut out. And this is a design that I just made on my computer. You could also search or draw your own design. And I made different sizes just to mix it up a little bit. And I'm just going to glue this onto my heavier paper. And then of course you could do this with an actual stencil, but I've been kind of in stay-at-home mode, and so trying to think of ways to do things with what you might have around the house. I figure most of us or many of us at least, have printers. So I'm actually doing kind of a reverse stencil technique where I'm going to cut out the shape and trace around it instead of trying to cut out the middle. So I'm just going to cut around these lines and cut these all out. It's going to take me a few minutes, so I'll meet you back in a bit. This is the part where you get to be the designer and have some fun. And I've been playing with some different placements, as you can tell by the shirt I'm wearing and the other examples that I shared with you. So you can put your design wherever you want. And I think for this one, I'm really thinking I want to go down just one side. And so I think I'm going to do the right side and maybe even the sleeve and possibly on the back. We'll see. And I like these stencils that are really simple because you can place them however you want and you don't have to stress out about doing it right. And I am outside and it's a little windy, so I'm just going to use my paperweight there. But basically for this reverse stenciling, what you do is you take one of your patterns, I need a little bit smaller one, and place it where you want it, and then just trace around it. And don't worry about being perfect. And if you make a mess, that's okay because you can just wash this out later. And I'm just going to put as many hearts as I want and arrange them in different ways. You can overlap them or not overlap them. It's totally up to you what you want to do because this is your remix, your creation. And you are the designer, so go to town and draw your designs. You could always add more later if you want, and I'll meet you back in a bit. So with the embroidery floss, it has 6 little pieces, so you have to decide how thick you want it. And I think I'm going to do 3, and because I'm using this variegated different colors, I'm not going to double it this time, but a lot of times I do like to cut my thread twice as long and knot the ends together so I don't have to worry about my needle. But today I'm not. I'm just going to do about arm to nose, so fingertips to nose of thread, and cut that. This might be exciting with the wind here. And because I'm going to do 3, I need to separate it out. So I'm going to pick it apart, and this is good to do with a friend. You could have somebody hold this end while you pull them apart, or if you're tricky, I've kind of got it tucked between my fingers, then you can do it on your own if you don't have a helper. Or of course you can use all 6 if you want it to be more dramatic and thicker design. It's totally up to you. You're the designer. And since I am using embroidery floss, I do want a needle that will fit it better. So it's better if you get the needles that have the bigger openings. And I just wrapped up this extra floss so I can set it aside because I know I will need it later. So choose your end, and you want to double check and make sure that it's even. And then I find it helps if you really just pinch it tight between your thumb and finger so you can hold it together and push it through. And like I mentioned, a lot of times I do like to double, but since I'm using variegated thread and I don't want the colors to get really weird, I'm just going to knot one end. And I like to take my needle and my thread and make a smiley face, point them at each other, lay the thread on top of your needle and grab it with your right hand, or just reverse this if you're left-handed. So I'm pinching, taking my left hand, wrapping about 5 or 6 times, and then put your fingers over the wraps. Don't let go, that's the trick. And then I'm going to pull the pointy end of the needle while I still pinch. And sometimes it gets a little bit weird, but most of the time you just pinch until you get to the end. Okay. And if it gets weird, sometimes that just means you need to stop your knot and call it good. You can cut off that extra tail. And I like to use a back stitch for this, and because it's a little bit more durable, you could possibly do a running stitch, but I think because we're working with knit, you want a stitch that has a little bit of give, and the running stitch really doesn't. So for the back stitch, if you're right-handed, I like to come out in front about 1/8 of an inch from where I want to end up, and then go back and come out in front. So it's easier to work from the top. So if you always finish one stitch, so go back, touch your last stitch, come out in front, then you can always see what you're doing. So go back, touch your last stitch, come out in front. And it is okay to make your stitches a little bit bigger because the knit tends to stretch. Your stitches may end up a little bit smaller than you were thinking they would be. So go back, touch your last stitch, come out in front. And don't worry about them being perfect. That's the beauty of doing handwork and homemade, you know, on your own without the machine. We're not perfect like a machine. And I think that gives our work character and beauty that sometimes we get hung up on the imperfections. Don't do that. And this is the part where it's going to take a little bit of time, depending how many designs you have to do. But this is the part where it can also be very mindful. And you can do this, you know, and just really focus on what you're doing. I love to hand sew while I'm watching TV because then I feel like I'm being productive. You can listen to music. And the nice thing also is because you're doing it by hand, you can take it anywhere. So right now I'm in the backyard enjoying a beautiful day. So there's a lot of benefits to doing things by hand. So you're just going to keep going until you're ready to stop. So, okay, I made a big mess there. Got myself all... Okay. The good thing about only having a single thread is that you can unpick things really easily. Don't try to take your needle back through the fabric. If you have to, cut off your needle so you can go back through. But don't try to take your needle back. You'll be very frustrated. Okay, so I want to show you, I'm not done yet, but I want to show you how to end in case you need to know. And one of my guidelines is stop when you have about 4 fingers of thread left. So if you're not going to finish by then, make sure you leave yourself plenty of thread, because the alternative is if you go further, you might have to tie a knot by hand, and that's not very much fun. So leave yourself enough thread to work with, and then come to the back side. And I like to just go through these stitches that I already made, make a loop, and then bring your needle through the loop. And then I actually like to go through the loop again and pull that tight. So give yourself a good knot. If you feel that you need it, you can do it twice, and then you can cut this off and start again. So keep going until you finish your design, and then all you have to do is throw this in the wash and it will come right out.